you very much. Thank you, Valeria, for the introduction, and thank you for you participants to taking the time to attend this session, and I hope it will be beneficial for all of you. So, as Valeria mentioned, today we will cover the topic of the INEE minimum standards. The standards were updated and launched recently on the 7th of May specifically. And we at INEE, we are starting a round of orientations for our members and organizations that are interested in learning more about the INEE minimum standards. So today's session will be co-facilitated by myself. I'm the Learning and Development Coordinator at INEE, and my colleague Daria from Save the Children Switzerland. Yeah, Daria was supposed to be with us in the room, but yeah, she is joining us online. And I just wanted to highlight that this session is really a work of a group of INEE members who had supported us with the co-design, and we are just starting to deliver it. So we would appreciate if you are indulgent and if you tell us what you think really about it, and you give us your feedback so that we can improve it for future runs. So this is really a session that was worked with a group of INEE members, and I will briefly introduce INEE now for those who are not very much familiar with the network. And we appreciate that you keep in mind that we are open to all your feedback, the negative and the positive, and I will share with you ways to do this at the end. So just before we start, I'd like to make clear about the orientation, what we call orientation session. It is for INEE, it is an interactive session. So I will present the minimum standards, but I would also expect you to work and collaborate on activities with small groups or individually, and have also plenary discussions so that we achieve the following learning objectives. So you will learn about the minimum standards, what they are created for, and what is their structure. And we will have the chance maybe to try to navigate a little bit the handbook or the minimum standards, because they have more than one format, let's say, but we will focus on the handbook so that you start to feel familiar with looking into this very important resource. And at the end, I hope you will have enough background so that you can start reflecting on your current work, if it aligns with these standards, or how and why you should or your future activities and programs would align with the standards. So these are the learning objectives of the orientation. I know that you might have many questions. We will have several pauses. Let's say I will make a stop during the session and ask you if you have questions. I will not be able to follow. You can write in the chat all the time, but I will not be able to follow both. Excuse my, I'm not good in multitasking. So I prefer that you share your questions by voice or by writing during the moments where I would invite you to do so. Just that I make sure that I'm listening to all of you. So before we fully delve into the topic, I wanted to highlight the tools that we will be using today. And some of them might be a little bit new for you, and I would like to listen to your feedback and to your impression. And if you tell me that this doesn't work, then I will take it as a learning for next times. So for today, I asked you to download the full minimum standards, but also I provided you with an excerpt. I extracted a few pages into a PDF file that I sent it to you yesterday. And I would invite you to rather work on this document because it is easier to follow. The handbook is more than 250 pages. And what I extracted is about 30 pages. So let me just show you that very quickly for you. So this is these are pages from the minimum standards. And we will try to work with these pages because they are easier to navigate for you. So there's the table of content, there's what we call the map, and also the grids with the different standards. So it's really extracted from the handbook, and it's to help you navigate easier and find answers to the questions that I will ask you without feeling that you will be lost with the entire handbook. So this is one tool that we will be using. I will share these slides with you. In principle, I sent them beforehand, but I continued to change till just 10 minutes ago. So sorry for that, but you will receive a copy of them. We will also use the chat, and we will have a chance to work in small groups in breakout rooms. Don't hesitate to turn on your video and your audio if you want to discuss and share with all of us. You can raise your hand by raising your real hand or by using the Zoom hand. You let me know if you need me to show you how we do this. And most importantly, I want to introduce a tool which is a whiteboard from Canva, the platform Canva. And we are using this because if you are used to the Google Jamboard, this tool will be phased out by October. So we needed to look for an alternative. And I personally found the Canva whiteboard a useful tool because it has similar features as the Jamboard. It's maybe more complex, but we can use only what we need from it. So before we do anything else, let me just show you how we do it and invite you maybe to start using it by starting to make introductions on this on this whiteboard. Can you share the link, please? The whiteboard. It is in the slides. Or let me do it. So I'll share the link so that you can access it. I'll do it here.
Okay. Yes, Daria has posted it already.
Okay.
The link.
Thank you, Daria. Okay, so the Canva whiteboard is similar to the Jamboard as it has pages. So it will help us to organize our work on several pages. And all I will ask you to do during this session is to add a sticky note. So to add a sticky note, it's only, you need to click on Elements here, and then you choose the sticky note of the color that you want. You don't need to log in, so you can access without any login. So you pick a sticky note, and you can start writing your name, writing your organization and where you are based. And if you work in a specific context, just place the sticky note next to the context. So we have 5 contexts: health crisis, forced displacement, protracted crisis, environmental crisis, conflicts. Or if you work in global topics or in more than one, you can just put your sticky note, you place it in the middle as I've done myself. So let's take a few minutes just to get to know you. It's a chance also to test the whiteboard. And then I will show you how we can move between pages. And now if you have any questions, you can just turn on your mic and ask me, and I will support you.
Maria?
So I see Daria and Valeria already started. If it is not easy for you, if you are on a mobile, you can write in the chat and I'll create the sticky note for you.
The sticky notes need to be drawn like from the side into the middle. So
Yeah, if you want to, yeah, you can, once it's created, you can then drag it around.
yeah.
Or you click in it and you can just write. And then if you don't like it, you can delete it. To delete, you need to go outside and then with the right button. I can maybe create few and you can add your names on them if it's easier for you.
It's under elements. You can take a sticky note and you can drag it to the whiteboard. Yes.
So, yeah, here's the elements. And then you click on the sticky note. You can choose your color. Okay. I think we are all almost here. Maybe we are missing one or two. So while you are trying, just let me show you how we can move from one page to the other. We will not use it now, but just as we are familiarizing ourselves. So you see this small arrow, we call it. So if it is where you can open, show pages, or you can hide the pages. So the next page is a place where you can add your own questions and ideas for later. So this is the parking lot. You can write here what you want to discuss, and we can get back to it if we have time. Otherwise, I'll make sure to get back to you and answer your questions and reply to you. And then we will have the other pages that they are related to other activities during the sessions. So it is, yeah, for the moment, it's quite simple. You only need to go to elements and click on a sticky note, and then you click inside it and you write what you want. So let me now go back to the, yeah, my presentation is rather here. Yes. So Okay, so is there any questions? So if not, let me just introduce the INEE, because maybe all of you know INEE, but let's give a refresher of what is this network for those who might think it's not really a well-known. It's a network, it's not an organization. So INEE is the Interagency Network for Education Emergencies. So it is a network, and we are an open and global network. So we are composed of more than 22,000 individual members. It's a free network. Anyone can become a member. We also have partner organizations, more than 4,000 around the world, between INGOs, local CBOs, community-based organizations, or UN agencies, and many organizations that all are working for education. So INEE is a body to coordinate, to support the work of these organizations and members, and to put some consistency and cohesion through the work of all of them. So the main purpose is that everyone, all individuals, have right to access quality and relevant and protective education. So the purpose is really around availing education to everyone, despite any crisis or any conflict or any emergency situation. So this is INEE, and INEE does a lot of things, and it's mainly about supporting the partner organizations and the members with technical knowledge. So we have a lot of tools and resources. Today we have the minimum standards as the main topic. But if you go to INEE website, you will discover that we have thousands of resources, and we have also collections that were vetted by experts and members. We have also a glossary that is always growing, and we support the work of members in 5 languages: in English, French, Arabic, Spanish, and Portuguese. So if we talk about the glossary and you look for one term in one language, you can also find it in the other language. So I wanted to highlight this because sometimes people miss all the resources that they can find on INEE. So we have all these resources, and the new version of the minimum standards provides some entry points into these resources. And I thought that it's useful to talk about them here. And you can, if you are able to see, so we have work around child protection, around inclusive education, about conflict-sensitive education, teacher well-being, and also a training for teachers in crisis context. So all these elements and all these topics are covered by not INEE itself, but by its members and experts from the network. So now that I presented INEE and we played a little bit with the whiteboard, let's get into the topic. And let's discuss together maybe why we need what we call the INEE minimum standards. And for that, I would like to ask you this question, and feel free to write in the chat or to just open your mic and tell us, what is the top priority for people in crisis, whatever crisis, whatever type of crisis? What is the top priority for these people, according to you?
write on the
Yeah, you can write on the chat, or you can just open your mic and mention what you think about. Don't be shy. Yes, security, hope, yeah, thinking about the future, survival. Any other ideas? Okay, so yeah, this is really very important, Amparo, understanding what is happening and what are the services that are available to us. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, Nadine, you are talking about the basic needs that they are surely the priority of people when they suffer from a crisis. But let me show you this graphics. Yeah. Do you want to see me? Okay. Okay, so this is a graphics that is part of a report developed by Save the Children UK in 2019. And it is these are the responses of children from 6 countries. And it's the responses of more than 1,200 children. And you can see that they think about food, they think about health, shelter, money, but most importantly for them, they think about education, and by far. So, and these are the responses from children, but this is also the same priority for their parents. So people in crisis, we will not discuss what is a crisis here because it will take too long for us, but you can think about conflicts, about natural disasters, about pandemics. People in crisis, whenever they feel secure first and get some food, they will start to think about where can we send our children to school again. So, we now understand that education is a priority, but what do we mean by education in emergency? So when we talk about education in a crisis, what do we mean by that? So to help you, I just brought this drawing. It's talking about the teacher role when we are in a development, let's say in a normal situation, and about a teacher in emergency. So according to you, what do we mean by education in emergencies? Please, you can come in with your voice. We are not too many, so you're welcome to speak out. Or write in the chat if you prefer.
Really, according to this drawing, there is a shift of the priority of what education needs to focus on in emergency, right? It's just an example. I guess could be in-betweens, etc., but that where the focus on the well-being becomes much more important.
Exactly.
So there is a crisis, and it's not that important that you have kind of content learning or learning to acquire a lot of knowledge, but to have a setting where you can feel safe. And maybe to respond to the point that was here mentioned by Amparo, to understand what's happening, to have kind of a
to feel safe and feel kind of a feeling of normalcy, because when children go to school, they feel like if it's like the life before, that they have friends and they go to school and And here we see that the role of the teacher also evolves, and there are a lot of discussions around the role of teachers and what the teachers also need in emergency. So we expect them to provide psychosocial support and take care of the well-being of the children, but what about themselves? So these are new needs. So we still have a teacher, we still have a education when we are in emergency, but it is, I would say, let me move to the second slide. Education emergencies is still education. So it has the same components we need to cover and avail inclusive and quality education to all the people at all the levels, and also availing learning in the different ways of education. So we can talk about formal education, non-formal education. Sometimes in normal situations, we don't need much of non-formal education, while when we go to emergency situations, the non-formal education programs become key and become an important part of education programming. And also, when we talk about education emergencies, everyone has the right to early childhood development, primary education, secondary education, and tertiary education. So EIE, this is education emergencies, we usually say EIE is about education in the first hand, but also it becomes very critical because it has additional components of protection, security, of providing holistic learning. It's not only about providing academic content. It's not the most important to go and run the same curriculum as the required by the Ministry of Education if the children are not able to feel safe and are ready to learn. So here there are other aspects that come in, let's say, in the balance, and education emergencies is really education, but with other components of protection and also we say that education save and sustain lives. This is where we think that with education we can help people to recover and to become self-sustained and autonomous and not rely all the time on humanitarian aids. When we talk about education emergencies, we distinguish 3 stages. So the preparedness, ideally we prepared for the crisis before the crisis arrives. So for example, now there are discussions about how to prepare for pandemics before we have a new pandemic. And the same should be for how to prepare for education during pandemics before we get the pandemic. And then the response, this is during the crisis, and the recovery is how to help the learners and the people to continue to move smoothly from the programs that were set for education emergencies into the traditional programs of education. So all these aspects are what we call education emergencies. And in fact, this is the definition of education emergencies that you can find in the standards. And here I just kind of pick them out so that we can see the most important key aspects of education emergency. So, as you can see, people want education, and education emergencies has other aspects and additional needs, and let's say we need to respond to new questions and new needs and environments in order to avail this education to everyone. So how can we provide the right response for all types of crises and for all people in all countries at all ages. So this is where in the year 2000, there was an agreement on the need of creating the INI as a network, and then to create a document, a framework that is based on the international laws and the international rights to support education in all types of emergencies and crises. So the INI minimum standards appeared for the first time in the year 2004. And then they got an update in the year 2010. And since then, we were not, we worked on a new update, and it took us, I can tell you, 2.5 years to get this new edition of the minimum standards that was released less than a month ago. So on the 7th of May, we had a public launch of the new edition of the minimum standards of education. But what are these minimum standards? They are a framework. I will walk you through them and explain more in depth. But what I need you to think about now, that this is a framework. This is not a rule book. There will not be, let's say, recipes for solutions. But what this framework helps is to protect and maintain the right to education during crisis, and to make sure that everyone has access to safe and relevant learning opportunities at all levels, and also to improve the quality of preparedness, response, and recovery. So with the minimum standards, we understand that there are things that we can do before we ever have a crisis, and things that we should do so that we move from the, let's say, the temporary emergency responses to the stable education solutions supported most of the time by ministries and governments. And also that the standards have a role to make everyone who's working in education emergencies accountable for their services and their programming and their actions. And also the standards, they support coordination. We can talk a lot about coordination. There are many bodies around the world that support education in emergencies. And we need to coordinate between these bodies and these structures. And the minimum standards allow framework for this coordination. So these are, let's say, the basic goals and the intention and the rationale of the minimum standards. Maybe now I can pause and let you maybe think a little bit and tell me if you have any questions about the rationale behind the minimum standards, because before I walk you through the structure of the standards. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Ulla, yes. I've just looked at the handbook, and then it says sometimes look at guidance note on gender. So is the guidance note on gender going to give me more information than the handbook?
Yes, so the guidance notes, these are resources that were built based on the standards. So they will give you more technical support, more ideas to implement aspects related to gender. So they are, let's say, they are an extension of the standards.
Mm-hmm. And so what does the handbook give me?
So just one moment. Daria, just confirm that you are hearing when others are speaking in the room. accept me because I'm closer to the. In principle, it works, but just confirm that you are. Yeah, you are hearing us. So Mario, the standards are the framework, and they exist since 20 years now. And since then, INEE and its partners and experts, they developed additional tools to help implement specific aspects. So we will talk about these aspects. You mentioned gender. So the guidance notes on gender, if you go into it, it will give you specific, let's say, more specific actions to, for example, to guarantee equity in education. While the standards are more, they are more universal, more global, more a little bit, let's say, more abstract. When we talk about the standards, we don't say how we can implement them because this is really very, very contextual. We give key actions, we give guidance notes in the standards, but then everything can be developed further so that you have programs, you have initiatives, you have actions on the ground specific to a specific context.
Okay, I think the term handbook may have created some confusion because we also speak about this minimum standards handbook. And
Yes,
handbook
so, yeah.
this is a practical tool for implementation.
Yes. So
while these tools are provided also with separate documents that provide more concrete tools and
thank you for reminding me of this. So when we talk about the standards, and in this specific session, I talk a lot about the handbook because we will be using the PDF version of the standards. But the standards also exist in other formats, including in web-based format. So and then I'm trying just to
this window.
Maybe to. So this is the homepage of the INEE website, and there is in the tools you can see the INEE minimum standards, and what is downloadable. This is what we call it, the handbook, because at the time it was really a small book, and it was a handbook. Let's say that people were happy to have it with them. For the moment, we don't have a print out of the standards, but you can have them here also interactively. So you can go standard by standard and explore them. So you will see that for each standard, we have key actions, guidance notes. And so I will come to this later. I prefer the handbook because the handbook includes much more information, and we will go to this also later in the session. So when we talk about the handbook, it is the standards in the PDF file for the moment, it's containing. And if we go to, let's say, there is the resources at INEE, you will see, let me go to the collections. You have these collections were created by a group of members and proposed, let's say, so you can see here, we explain what are the aspects of gender in education emergencies. And then we have a list of documents that you see, for example, there's guidance notes on gender. So this is a separate document. This is not the standards, but it is based on the standards. Okay, and the good thing in the that is not yet on the website, but it is in the PDF, is that you have links to these things. And I'll come to this later. Any other questions? Okay, so I'll assume this as so let's discuss, now that we started with the curiosity about the structure of the minimum standard, let's discover that. When you will go to the minimum standards, and when you go to the introduction, you will see a representation as this wheel. And this wheel is a representation of the 5 domains of the INEE minimum standards. So when we talk about MS, it's always the minimum standards in this session only. So the minimum standards are organized in 5 domains. The first domain, we call it the foundational standards for a quality response, and it contains 3 subdomains: the community participation, the coordination, and the analysis. And then you have the other 4 domains that are access and learning environment, teaching and learning, teachers and other education personnel, and education policy. So these are the domains. So you can imagine this as the sections of the standards. And then in each domain, you have a number of standards. So the foundational domain contains the most of the standards. It has 7 standards, and then the others will have between 2 and 4 or 5 standards. So all in all, the INEE minimum standards are 19, and they cover different topics related to education and emergencies, and they are organized in these domains. So this is one representation of the domains, but we have another representation that you will use maybe more extensively. And this is what we call the map of the minimum standards. We have the domain 1, as I've told you, the foundational standards for quality response. And it contains 7 standards between the 3 subdomains. We also have the domain access and learning environment, the teaching and learning, teachers. There's a domain focusing on teachers, and also a domain focusing on education policy. So these domains are really covering specific topics. So and you can see that the foundational standard is called now, it changed from the previous edition. We say that this is a domain, or these are standards for a quality response, because they help. If you look at the titles of the standards, they help build a coordinated and accountable education response. And they are the support of implementing the standards from the other domains. This is why we call them foundational. And this is why when we were talking, they are surrounding the other domains. Similarly, we have the domain 2, where we talk about the learning environment and availing equal and equitable access to it. We talk about protection. We talk about what is needed in the facilities for learning. Teaching and learning is more about the curriculum, about the learning outcomes. And please notice that we talk about holistic learning outcomes. So it's not only the academic learning outcomes. We talk about also teaching and learning processes, so pedagogy. And we have also a specific standard related to training and professional development for teachers and other educators. The domain 4 is focusing on the relationship with teachers, so recruitment and selection, their conditions of work, their salaries, and also their support and supervision. So if we work with the minimum standards, we understand that teachers are not only providers of service, providers of education for the children, they also need to be supported and they need to have good conditions of work. And we also work a lot around teacher well-being. At INEU and members, they produced a lot of work related to teacher well-being and their conditions of work. The final domain is really talking about education policy. So when we work with ministers of education, we need to make sure that we align with their policies, with national laws related to education. And when we talk about planning and implementation, so when we plan for programs in education emergencies, this should not be standalone. This should be in coordination with what exists already in the country or in the region, and to coordinate also with other actors. So this is an overview of the standards, and this representation, we usually call it the INEE minimum standard map. So when we talk about the map, we refer to this representation where you see the domains and you see the titles of the standards. And this map is part of the introduction chapter in the handbook. We'll get to practice with it a little in a moment. So now that we saw what are the domains and what are the standards in the domains, in an overview, let's get into the details of the structure of a standard. So here I selected, it's just an example. You don't need to read the standard. I selected this one simply because I have all the elements in one page. So this is a screenshot from a page in the handbook, and it's the standard 15. So don't worry about the text. We will not read it. I just want to explain to you that when we go into the domains and then into the standards have a title and then they have a text. And if you read the text is really universal. It applies to all contexts. It's qualitative. We don't specify, for example, specific numbers. We don't say we should have 15 pupils in a classroom. You will never see that in the minimum standards. They are always qualitative, and we hope that we can apply them, but we are never sure that we can achieve them. So this is why we say that they are aspirational. But in fact, this is what we aim for. So this is, when we achieve the standard, this means that we achieve the minimum level to say that we have a quality education. And this is why we say minimum standards. So the minimum standard it means that this is where we should be to be sure that we have the quality education. So the first thing is the standard, the text of the standard, and each standard is always followed by what we call key actions. And these are suggested ways to implement the standard. And they are not at all exhaustive. So these are proposals, and they've been done by a consultative group of thousands of people who contributed to writing, to editing, to updating the standards. So these are what they agreed on, but it doesn't mean that there are not other key actions. But these are suggested ways to achieve the standards, and they help in they help to start creating actions, and they need them to be contextualized to a specific context and a specific place to be really meaningful. So for each key action, then for this version of the minimum standards, we aligned guidance notes. So this is new in this edition of the minimum standards, is that for each key action, we only have one guidance notes. In the previous edition, we had a number of key actions and a different number of guidance notes. So it was not always aligned one-on-one, and they decided to do it this way, so it becomes easier to read. And the guidance notes, they kind of propose specific aspects and good practices that were tested by members and in the past, and that we propose as as a way to start implementing the standard in a specific context. So these are also helpful as when you ask a question, how might I do it? How might I implement the standard? And then you look at the key actions, you say, yeah, this key action is relevant to my context. So let me see what the guidance note tells me about this key action and how I can implement it. And so this is how we read the standards and how we might use them. And sometimes when we write, we want to provide, let's say, to design a program, we decide on specific aspects, we go to the standards related to them, and then we pick the key actions, and then we contextualize them with the guidance notes, and then we have a proposal of a program. I know I'm simplifying things, but this is one way to use the standards. And the last piece for each standard, and this is what, it's kind of, it's helping us to navigate the minimum standards and make connections, is that for each guidance note, we can have propositions to go and look at other related guidance notes. So these are aspects to help us enlarge our perspective on how to implement specific aspects of education in emergencies. So this is the general structure for the standards. And what does not appear here is the further readings and resources that Marion just referred to. So this is where you have suggestions of, I can show you this in the example, in the excerpt that I provided to you. So when you have the standard, at the end of each standard, sorry, I'm scrolling too fast. I hope you are not dizzy with this. So at the end of each standard, you have references and further reading. And here you have additional tools that will help you to make the implementation of the standard. So you see, for example, here, just I'm looking at this at random. You see, if you want to talk about community participation and how you can implement this, then you can learn maybe from the guidance note on capacity strengthening for localization. So these are additional resources that will help you to go further. So the standards are really a starting point for you when you want to create relevant actions to avail quality education in a crisis context. So let me get back 5 minutes to, so this is the structure of each standard. And what I wanted to add also is to attract your attention to a very essential chapter that doesn't exist in the web-based minimum standards, which is the introduction. The introduction is about 20 pages, and it has a lot of very important information to understand education emergencies, to understand the background and the rationale of the minimum standards, and to understand how it was developed. And also there are explanations of why we updated these standards. So this would respond to the question of Beatrice about what changed from the previous addition to this one. So I will not go into details. I just want you to retain that I advise that first thing you read the introduction, because it explains a lot of things about the standards. So the structure that I just highlighted to you now is explained in using the INEE minimum standard. And we will now talk about aspects that are called the cross-cutting issues. I'll come to this later. And they are very well explained and described in the introduction. Talking about the consultative, the process that was done, I told you, it took 2.5 years to get to this current edition of the minimum standards, and a lot of collaboration and a lot of back and forth between people until we had this final version. And also there's an explanation of what evolved during the last 14 years now since the last edition. And also for those who are interested in getting the broader view of frameworks, of standards, of flows. So there's also a section in the introduction explaining these connections. I'm not covering this in this session, but you can go to the introduction and read that. So you see that I highlighted cross-cutting issues. So let us see why. If you go to the map in the minimum standard handbook, you will see the cross-cutting issues below. So what are these cross-cutting issues? So I've put them here in large. These are topics that are so important and so cross-cutting. They go everywhere, let's say, in all the contexts, in all the crises, and all the in all the programmings, let's say. So they are also integrated throughout the minimum standards. So you will not have a specific paragraph discussing protection. Protection is everywhere in the standards. When you go to the guidance notes, you will find a lot around protection. You will find a lot around psychosocial support, because it's not one standard to talk about psychosocial support. There are many that deal with psychosocial support for the children, for the teachers, for the community also. So these are what we call cross-cutting issues, and they should be present in all the crises, in all the, let's say, the programmings and initiatives that are built on the minimum standards. These are, many of them continued from the last edition, and others are new. So climate crisis is new. Disaster risk reduction, I think it's also new. So these are the cross-cutting issues that were integrated across all the minimum standards for this edition. So just before I pause for your questions, I wanted also to highlight, in addition to the main introduction, that each domain has its overview, and it explains the rationale of each domain and explains a lot around the standards. So these are also very important pieces, reading pieces, that will help you to understand how you can use and implement the standards. As I've showed you, there are these references and further reading after each standard. And at the end of the handbook, you have a glossary and an index as any book. So this is also a way to kind of browse through the handbook using the index. So you have more specific way of searching for specific keywords. And you have also an annex where you have the legal instruments that underlie the minimum standards. So I'll stop here again and see if you have any questions around the structure of the minimum standards. Any questions? But if not, it will be your turn to work now. Any questions here in the room? Okay, so if everything is clear, it's now your turn to work. And the first activity that I invite you to do is just a simple math quiz. I'll ask you questions and I would like you to answer them. So no need to go to the document. I'll put the map for you here. So whether you speak out and you tell the answer, and I would like to hear you, or you paste your answer in the chat if you are shy. Okay, so here are the standards. I hope they are readable for all of you. Otherwise, you can turn to your document. And I'll start by asking you a few questions. And maybe I don't know if I can paste them in the chat here. I'm not.
Do you want me to paste them?
Do you have them?
Yes. The question?
No. Yeah. So let me just. No, this is not. Yeah, just give me a moment so that I make sure I have access to this. The questions. So that I paste them for you. So now you are looking at the map, and what I would like you to tell me first. Yes, what is the title of domain 1 and why is it named so? So
you can paste them. You just
yeah. So
question 1.
Yeah, it's yeah, maybe I can do it. Maybe easier for me. Let me paste. So what is the title of domain 1 and why it is named so? I already explained that, so maybe it's good to listen to you and see how you understood what I've said. You can speak also. Yes, yes, Amparo. Please.
Yes. Hello, good afternoon to you. Good morning in Bolivia.
Hi.
I am Amparo. I am working for SDC in Bolivia. And yesterday I was reading the first domain, the foundational standard for a quality response. And I realized that it's very important area, and I think that the title is because it is the basis to work with the community, to work with the agencies, and to support all the strategy with these foundational standards.
Yes, great. Thank you. This is really, yeah, a great answer. Thank you, Amparo. So yeah, maybe you will encourage the others to respond. Let me face the other question. So what is the domain of the standard planning and implementation? Yes, great, Marion. Yeah. So just to notice that the foundational standards, if you look at them, we talk about assessment, we talk about monitoring, evaluation, we talk about response strategy. So it's not, yeah, planning and implementation can be, we can imagine that it can be part of the foundational standards, but it is part of the education policy because the content of it, it's really related to policy, while planning and implementation of an EIE program can go in the response strategy. So yeah, it's just the title sometimes doesn't help to identify the domain. So my next question is about teacher professional development, if I managed to paste it. Yeah. So identify 2 standards that support teacher professional development. So the standards and their domains, of course. Anyone to reply? Yeah, standard 17. Yes.
Standard 12 maybe as well. Teaching and learning processes.
Not exactly, but not far from it.
Curricula.
It's yes, Nadia. This is standard 14, training, professional development, and support, and also the support and supervision.
And what about 9? Is that only for the students, the learners?
So protection and well-being, this one, I think it's for, I looked at this and I don't remember anymore. I think the protection and well-being here is for everyone, but then you have also protection and well-being for the teachers in standard 16 in conditions of.
Okay.
But yeah, I was talking about the training, yeah, the professional development. They are in standard 14 and standard 17. Okay. I'll ask another last question. And in fact, this is the question of Marion, so that we listen to the others. Which standards tackle mental health and psychosocial support? So as I've told you, I looked at it and I forgot, but now I have the answers. I let it for you now to answer. There is one that is not expected. Yes, standard 9. What else? There's more than one. 17, yes. There's a third one. Yeah, more or less 16. Yes. $14 can be. In fact, I was thinking about standard 13.
Yeah.
Where we talk about assessment of holistic learning outcomes. And this is where comes the support of the psychological and the physical and the well-being of the students. So assessment doesn't mean only exams, also assessment of how we support them. So here also we talk about psychosocial support. So you see, maybe all your answers are right. We need to go to the standards. As I've said, mental health and psychosocial support is almost, as it is a cross-cutting issue, it's almost everywhere. And it might be handled in a guidance note in one, in an action in the standard text in another. So it is really something that is cross-cutting and that is integrated through the whole minimum standards. Okay, so yeah, I think we've done great with this activity. Yeah. I will try. Yeah, I wanted to give you some time for feedback on your own learning. Maybe you can take the time after this session to do it. And conclude with you on this key takeaway for me is that what is the minimum standards, handbook of the minimum standards in general, and what they are not. What are these standards? So the standards, they are not prescriptive. You've seen that you don't have details of how to implement activities or how to create a program. The standards, they also are supportive of many actors. So child protection people, they use these standards. People building safe spaces, safe learning spaces, temporary safe learning spaces will use the standards. So anyone who is, kind of related to education, not necessarily only education professionals, can use the standards in a way or another, or learn something from these standards. And it's not only about acute crisis. So some of the standards were relevant, for example, even in Switzerland with the pandemic, there were some relevance, and they were maybe solutions that were taken not necessarily based on the standards, but you can see that they are aligned with the minimum standards. And it talks about all types of education and not only limited to formal education, because it's on the contrary. In most crisis contexts, non-formal education becomes really a key solution to provide education to most of the children and most of the youth. So the standards are in fact a framework. So they are really just to help us, to guide us into what we should do, and sometimes things that we might miss, but when we see them in the standards, we think about them. Let's say teacher well-being, something that we might miss, but when we go to the standards related to teachers, we see that we emphasize on teacher well-being. And they, since they are universal and not contextualized, we can talk a lot about contextualizing the minimum standards. They are adaptable and flexible. You can use them, you can adapt them, you can take what is possible for you and then implement them. And they are relevant to all actors, not only for schools, not only for kindergartens, not only for universities, and not only for, let's say, camp schools. They are relevant to all the actors, and they can find something meaningful for them there. And most importantly, we can use them for advocacy. So even people in crisis, if they learn about these standards, they know how to advocate for their rights. They know what are their rights, and they can ask for them. And other advocacy partners, they can do it using the standards. So this is what I wanted you to retain about these standards.